There we go.
Okay, can you guys hear us now? Trish? Okay, I got you. Trish is looking like she doesn't hear us.
we go.
Oh, all right. Good, good. She's a special friend of mine. She was my son. I tell us about once a decade. She was my son's special education teacher 35 years ago, maybe? It was a few years ago anyway.
I think it was only 10.
And it was 33. He's 43 now, if you can believe. And when she was no longer his teacher, he lamented. And he said, oh, she was the best teacher I ever had. Oh, this is, so anyway, I always appreciated.
You ready for this?
Go.
This meeting will be recorded and will be posted to YouTube and other social media platforms. By participating in this meeting, you understand that the recording could contain your video stream or your audio stream, including images of yourself or anyone in the room with you. If you choose to enable your video or audio device during the meeting, as well as anything or anyone else that may be in the background could be recorded. The recording could include any opinions you contribute or anything you say about yourself. On occasion, chat within the meeting could also be captured in the meeting recording. Therefore, anyone attending the recorded meeting may have aspects of their personal data recorded if they actively participate or not.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the minutes from the last meeting.
Move to accept. Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor? Okay. That's done. Now, policies. I don't think this is going to take long, so I hope you don't mind. We're just going to run through these. I think if you could just give us a little précis on each of these or what it means, Colleen, that would be helpful to us.
Sure. The policy that has the most differences in it, if you will, is a new policy around harassment of students. And so this is specifically around harassment. It also identifies that if there is employee to student harassment, student to student harassment, and it talks about Title IX investigation. So this is fairly new. And when you flip to the policy right behind it, the non-discrimination and harassment policy, some of the language from the first policy is then updated in the second policy. And part of that is around the non-discrimination statement that's been updated to include other classes of people, so on and so forth, programs, activities, that type of thing.
Why do we need both of these? Because you were saying, well, this harassment of students also includes non-discrimination. And you come to the next one, and AC seems much the same as JICK.
So I think the answer to that is because they're really putting a focus on harassment of students and calling that separate and making sure that we're paying attention to ensuring that all of our students feel safe within all of our activities that we present. So not only on our campuses, but if we take them out to field trips, not only by our own staff, but if we hire or we have other people working with our students, so any consultants who might come in or people who are outside of the district that also work with the students, all of this pertains to everyone and all venues that our students may be participating in.
Well, you really think we need to have both of them?
I think we do.
Because MASC tells us, or some lawyer
No,
tells us, or you really think that it's?
No, I really do think that it is. It's quite specific in that it calls out the employee to student harassment and also student to student harassment. And it's not bullying per se, it's harassment, which if you look at this language and you compare it to bullying, there are some differences and discrepancies in the language that I think is worth noting.
No kidding. What What's an example of a difference between harassment and bullying?
So bullying is sort of the repeated behavior that happens over time, but harassment does not necessarily need to be repeated.
No kidding. I was at the State Board of Education meeting in Illinois probably 30 years ago, and there was a fellow there. He's married to Helena Rubinstein, I think, one of those women's cosmetic things. And he said, that sounds like how did he put it? A difference without a cause. And that's sort of what that seems like. But if you, that's the way you feel, that's fine. Any committee member questions on either of these?
Yeah, why not? On the second page of the harassment of students, grappling with the first line there. Anytime I see by law, I get a bit of response. By law, what constitutes harassment? And first of all, it should be, I don't think you need the what. If you're going to say something constitutes harassment, you should say harassment is determined by blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it's determined from the perspective of a reasonable person with the characteristic on which the harassment is based, maybe upon which. I wonder if that, in a way, could be used against somebody bringing harassment. I mean,
Bringing harassment is harassment.
well,
Possibly.
I mean, I'm just trying to think of what we're saying here because, the reasonable perspective, the reasonable person approach is always, embedded in a lot of these things. But at first I read it and I almost thought that it meant how I, as a reasonable person, would view person A harassing person B for whatever reason. And then I read it again and I said, okay, so I guess it's from the perspective of person B who's being harassed by person A because B has some sort of characteristic and is being harassed for that. But somebody can be harassed without having a specific characteristic. I'm just kind of.
Was this handed down from MASC to us?
Yes, it definitely
with that
is.
Wording?
If you feel like you want to take time to look at it, we don't have to vote on this one today. We can put it off to our next meeting if you feel like it needs.
Dr. Allen, just kind of contrary to what Lisa says, I see this more as not a disclaimer, but kind of a not a warning, I guess, for anyone who might question how what they say might be looked at as harassment. In other words, I could say something to Jenna, and Jenna could take it as harassment because of the characteristics that I put forward. So it would be like, so don't blame Jenna for what I said. It's my fault, and she took it as harassment, and there were specific characteristics of what I said that would constitute harassment in general. So I just see this as kind of like just be careful. It's not the way I look at it, it's the way Jenna would look at it that would make it harassment. That's the way I don't see it as kind of a legal constraint, Lee.
Yep.
Well, I think going off of first what Lee said, by law, what law, first of all? You have to say, oh, by law, well, is it a law, is it not? You need to cite the law. And then the second sentence of that paragraph says individuals should consider how their words and actions may reasonably be viewed by others. Well, that's kind of a wide interpretation. It's very vague, and we're dealing with children here. So of course, kids are going to have to reflect and think upon how their words and actions may have affected it. And are we kind of opening the door? Is this tight enough and clear enough that we could be opening ourselves for a very broad interpretation in which this could be used?
I'm going to take the MUHA approach here. We're going to pull this one for our next meeting, which will give us a chance, all of us a chance to look at it and cogitate on it and see how we feel about it. One interesting point I find is race to include traits, including but not limited to hair texture, hair type, hair length, and protected hairstyles. Maya, who's I think in the 10th grade this year, isn't she? Is a black student here. When she was in 7th grade, there was a session that was at UMass that was put on by the Center for Social and Racial Justice. And they had a panel and they wanted some kids. So they wanted me to help support it. So I said, fine, but one of our kids is going to be, so she was on that. And she and two of the other black participants, when they were asked the question of what do they feel that they were harassed about, it was their hair. So that seems to me kind of interesting that there's so much made of that in this policy here. Any other comments on this one? Okay, we're going to put that one aside then, Colleen.
Sure.
Non-discrimination or the AC. I think you sort of included that one in previous. Do we have any comments or questions on this one? Or as a group, would we like to keep them tied together and pull this one up for the next meeting?
Yeah, they're kind of married, so.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, let's do that also, Colleen. Curriculum development and adoption.
This is just a minor change where they've kind of put two policies into one. They've changed curriculum development from a separate policy, curriculum adoption, separate policy, and they've put them together. So the intention is that you read it from top to bottom. And really, this is just to ensure that we have curriculum adoption policies in place, which we've shared with the committee the past few years about our curriculum adoption cycles, and making sure that before we adopt any sort of curriculum, we thoroughly vetted it with our teams prior to bringing it to school committee.
Okay, and combining the two.
Yep.
That's absolutely the thing to do. Any committee comments or questions? Evaluation of the superintendent. Now, we have this before us. Auburn Regional School Committee and superintendent will periodically. So I talked to Colleen, basically she said instead of her setting goals and presenting them to us, we're supposed to do them in collaboration according to this, which doesn't make really good sense to me. She has a much better feel and handle for the school district, for education out in the world of what's going on and what important goals are. We bring our own perspective from our situation, positions in towns and so forth, and other than telling her, well, the towns are like the budget cut in half, which we personally don't agree with. That doesn't seem to make good sense to me. Do we have to adopt this one?
It's more of we're shifting language around, aren't we?
Right.
That's all we're doing.
Exactly right.
All we're doing is
We're not-
adding a few
We're not changing what has been.
No.
It's just a better language.
and a more
approach.
collaborative approach.
That's it. That's it. Okay, so you
Colleen
got,
likes it.
you like it?
Yes, I think it's great.
Okay, so that one's all right. Approval of handbook and directives.
This is just, they sort of struck the first sentence. So this policy previously was focused on grades 9 to 12 in their handbooks, and they've since broadened that by striking that out. So it's just that principals and school councils will prepare, distribute each student a handbook that's around the conduct of students, which we always present to you, our elementary handbooks as well. This just strikes that. That's all.
Okay. Safety programs. Take every precautions and in the facilities, not the plant.
So again, just some wording changes.
Okay. Face coverings.
And again, in red, wording changes. So they've added that if someone were to test negative after day 5, twice after day 5, and prior to returning to school on day 6, they're exempt from wearing a mask upon their return. So the circumstance that might be is if a person tested Saturday and Sunday, they're coming back on Monday, they were negative both days, they wouldn't have to wear their face covering, or perhaps over vacation, different things like that. Also takes some of the onus off of the district to have masks in all of our, providing all of those masks in our health offices, and takes away the mask on the school buses.
And it's so interesting to me that this clearly was not written by somebody that's in the schools. As they say, other than eating, drinking, or outside in conduct, active mind. You play a musical instrument, you can't much wear a face mask, or at least when they did it during they had an opening in it. So it didn't seem to, but the genius that did this hasn't been in a school and observed school activities and seen that that's part of what goes on with many kids. We're okay with that one, I assume.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
How, have we had a lot of cases, or has it been a big interruption as it hasn't? Kind of don't talk about it
Yeah,
anymore.
no,
Just a quick update.
it's
I don't wanna
really a
get
great
sidetracked,
question. Kim Stady, who is our lead nurse, sort of sees it in cycles, if you will. She was able to call when we were going to be hit. Once we returned to school, she knew the educators were going to sort of have a little bit of an outbreak of COVID, and then that the students were going to have one after that. And it went very much according to plan. I think things have settled down. We had one day where across the district, we had quite a few administrators out. It's probably the second week in October. And it happened at all of our schools. So part of it was we were together for professional development and things like that. So it's happening. I think that people are not getting as sick as they were, and so they're feeling better and ready to come back. But you can visit our school buildings and see people wearing their masks and, so on and so forth.
Good.
So I think people are being careful.
Good.
Well, from a health standpoint, I went into the gym to work out this afternoon, and lo and behold, I got shot.
You got a shot?
Got 2 shots.
Oh, nice.
COVID and
I got mine
Whoa.
today too.
is today the only day, or is there another day too?
Today's the first day that we offered one last week at Hubbardston. I don't know who participated, probably.
I didn't even know we had.
Yeah. So that was put out first, and then we had one today over here at the gymnasium, so.
Yeah, and then I was in there, and then a fellow committee member came in to harass me, but
There was no harassment.
it was
Do we
collegial
need to refer
conversation.
back to the
That's right, we need to
policy?
go back to the policy.
Okay, so I think we're all set on that one. Equal employment opportunities. Yeah, right. I don't even think we need to talk about that one, do we? I mean, it is, it is.
So again, some updated language here.
Yeah.
And the inclusion of the same line that you noted previously around hair texture, type, length, and protective hairstyles in regards to race.
And staff participation in political activities. Okay, you can't go soliciting campaigns, but if you want to run for office, you can. Seems to me that's pretty simple. Any comments on that one? Okay, do we have a motion to present these to the school committee other than the 2 harassment ones?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. Unanimous. Now, co-teaching and middle school intervention, Josie Ewart and Jillian Madden. Oh, we're looking forward to this. It seems like it's a really good good program. And we'd like to understand it better.
All right, hopefully we can help with that.
Right, give me 1 second. I just want to get up. Let's see.
Says presenter. Does that mean one of you can't present?
Okay. Can folks at home see that okay? Thanks, Trish.
Yes, so I think I'm up first with co-teaching. So I'm Josie York. I have been a special educator here in Quabbin for about 4 years now, and I'm currently co-teaching an inclusion coach at middle high school. So I wanted to talk about just a little bit about what co-teaching is to kind of clarify for those who might not be too familiar, and then how it's been going so far for us in Quabbin. So the way we're looking at co-teaching now is really that it's a service delivery option for our students on IEPs. So the way we write their grid of services, we have an A grid, a B grid, and a C grid. And B is the time that's in an inclusive environment in a general education classroom. So the objective of co-teaching really is to increase that amount of time so that they're in the least restrictive environment that they can be in with their peers. So this is accomplished by having 2 educators in the room, 2 licensed educators, typically a special educator and a general curriculum educator. Right now, our cohorts are focusing primarily on ELA classes in the middle school, and we have 1 pair of teachers who are doing Algebra 2 in the high school. So really, it's just all about planning the instruction together, delivering the instruction together, assessing the students together, and then kind of continuing on with that cycle. The thing that makes co-teaching different, one of the things, aside from having just 2 adults in the room, is that both adults are really influencing the conversation and the instruction of the students with the lens of special education services. So right now, our 7th grade ELA team is Allison, Nanika, and Nancy Roy. They've been working together for several years. That's kind of one of the benefits we've had in starting this program, is that many of the teachers already have good working relationships. So that piece of co-teaching, which is really very important, I kind of like to say that's like a marriage, was already in place and pretty easy to work with. Melissa Hart, Erin Bashan, and Jay Sacramone are our 8th grade teachers. And initially, Melissa was just going to be working with Erin, but Jay got excited about it and figured, well, we planned the curriculum together anyway, so why don't we do this in my room as well? So they've been doing that, and it's been going pretty well. And then Christine Kilmonis and Sherry Burkle is our Algebra 2 team. So those are the players. So some of the benefits that are, out in the research around co-teaching, but also that we're already seeing in our classrooms, are that increased amount of inclusion time. So we have a lot of kids who have between 30 minutes and 60 minutes on their grid for inclusion services. So that's either about half the class period or the full class period. But regardless of that grid time, most kids are now getting the benefit of a full 60 minutes of that special ed person coming in and helping to design and implement instruction, which is good not just for our IEP students, but also for the gen ed students, because it helps them to kind of see what instruction can look like in a different methodology, but also it helps to build that more accepting and inclusive classroom culture, so that just becomes the norm that students learn in different ways. So that kind of leads to the increased social acceptance, peer modeling, and social emotional learning, which is something that we've been definitely working on a lot here in Quabbin. It's really nice to go into a classroom and see that students are supporting each other, whether or not they might have learning difficulties, and that both can kind of take on a role within the classroom that is a leadership role as well as a receiving role, I guess is the way to say it. But teachers receive benefits too, so there's been a lot of research to show that when it's a good co-teaching pair and they've got that relationship and the communication is strong, There are things like increased camaraderie, collegial support. They get to try new things. Having that second person in the room, it gives you a little bit more bravery to try something you've never done before, because you've got two people that kind of manage the environment and help pick up the pieces if it doesn't go quite right. And then brainstorm around how it could go better next time. So there's a link in that if you get the slide sent to you that has a much more comprehensive list of benefits for both students and teachers. But I will say that I think the one that I've seen the most is that we've had some students who would really struggle being in a general ed curriculum, working to the grade level standard, unless they had that full amount of time with their gen ed teacher, who's able to modify assignments sometimes on the fly if they need to, and also kind of give those skills kind of mid-instruction that they might need to work towards. So that's been the biggest thing that I've seen.
Josie, before I change the
Yeah.
slide, could you just tell us a little bit about that graphic?
Yeah, so what you see there on the right are the 6 different models of co-teaching. So I know the text is really hard to read, but the little semicircles, the green semicircles stand for the teachers, and then all the orange colored squares are the desks, and the dots are the students. So basically our 6 models are 1 teach and 1 drift, or kind of circulate through the classroom, offering support on an individual basis during a lesson. There's team teaching, where both teachers might stand up at the front of the room and kind of take turns delivering the instruction or add on to the instruction in different ways. The parallel teaching is one that has been a little bit of a challenge because, of course, you're negotiating space, and it's when you literally kind of divide the class in half. And you're teaching the same lesson, but to 2 smaller groups of students. So you might have one teacher who's working at a slightly different pace, or interjecting more discussion or more strategies around building that knowledge, but they're both accomplishing the same standards. And then the bottom row, you have alternative teaching, which is often what we think of as small group teaching. So it's when you have maybe an intervention group that you need to do, or students need to build up some of the skills that are required for the work. Or maybe you have a group of kids who needs an extension activity because they've already got the concepts of what you're trying to do. So you might pull that small group aside and do a different lesson with them during the time that the teacher's presenting to the rest of the group. The second one in is 1 teach, 1 observe. So the benefits of having somebody who can just kind of sit back and observe a lesson are that you can take really good data around student engagement, as well as just whether or not students are kind of hitting those benchmarks independently that you would like to see them hitting. So a lot of times we have written into our students' goals on their IEPs that they're going to do whatever the specific skill is with increasing independence. So it's important to give them that opportunity to do so and be able to watch and see if they can do it. And then the last one is called station teaching. So you would have between 3 and 4 stations. Typically you have 2 stations that are kind of manned by a teacher, and then 1 station at least that is independent work. So a lot of teachers use this to both build the skills that are necessary as well as offer extension activities to students. And you may even have kind of different groupings of your students so that they're either moving in a heterogeneous group through the stations or a homogeneous group, and maybe that homogeneous group doesn't do every single station, but they get a little bit more time working on a particular skill that they might need. So there's lots of variations and ways to use it, but it's beneficial because it's kind of a little dose of what everybody needs in order to further the instruction.
Do you use all 6 of those models?
So that's the goal of our this year, basically, is to work towards using all 6 of those models and really ideally thinking through which model is best suited to the instruction that I need right now. So yes, the goal is to use all 6. Certainly some are easier to do than others, and some might require a bit more space. So we have the collaborative spaces now in the middle high school, which have been utilized quite a bit already, especially for the station rotation. It's nice to be able to offer more space when the kids are moving around. So we do aim to use all 6 of them, but it's definitely something that we're kind of building into teachers' practice and their repertoire, because some of them are kind of tricky logistically.
It looks like the lower left one would sort of be primary, I would think, because the general ed teacher could be teaching the lesson, and then the special ed teacher would be working with those that needed the extra work, the extra help.
So that's often how people view that. That's the small group teaching as something that's a primary school or elementary school model. And I think that's one of the things that we're actually trying to break as a conception in the middle high school, because it can be quite useful at any age. And it doesn't have to be that the special ed teacher is always pulling the special ed students to that table. Ideally, what we want to see in a co-taught classroom, or what we want to experience, is that we can't tell the difference between who the special ed kids are and the gen ed kids are, because both teachers are equally instructing all students. So it's a way of both normalizing and integrating our students so that there's not a stigma around being a special education student.
Well, it seemed to me there must be some synergy also, that the general education teacher would sharpen and improve his or her special ed skills, and the special ed teacher would learn more about the content.
Absolutely, yep. And that's kind of the place where we are right now with our teams. Many of them started the year feeling like, well, I don't know much about the ELA curriculum, so I'm gonna lean on you for that, right? The special ed teacher might say that to the gen ed teacher. And the gen ed teacher might say to the special ed teacher, well, I don't really know anything about writing an IEP or collecting data on IEP goals, so I'm gonna let you do that. But as they develop that working relationship and see it intertwined into the instruction, yes, that is exactly the hope, that they would each kind of learn the other side of things.
Yeah.
I'm thinking through all of this, one of the biggest benefits probably as a takeaway listening is all the kids you are reaching now that kind of fell in that in between. And I think especially at middle school, there's always been such a need for additional support. Now we have younger students up there, so I'm really excited about this, but I think you're right with, breaking down the barriers and the stigma of special ed, but I just think now we're reaching all of the students where they are. And I think that's been our goal is, how do we do that? And it sounds like this is a great method for that.
Yeah. So we like to say that if you plan for kind of the low end of what your students are currently capable of and the high end of what your students are currently capable of, then you address all the needs in between as well, because everybody can benefit from either piece of the instruction. I think there's one more slide, which was kind of what we're using as our goalpost for when we're doing highly effective co-teaching. So within the planning, there's collaboration of planning the lessons together, which that's what our teams are doing, meeting at least once a week to kind of plan out the week's lessons, determining which model, the 6 models, is most appropriate for the lesson that they're going to teach, and that they have clear roles and responsibilities. We've talked a lot about how there are certain times, like especially right now, the grading period, where gen ed teachers might have a stack of papers that they need to grade, and special educators are going to have a stack of progress notes that they need to write. And right now, I think people are still kind of navigating, well, how does that blend in if we're doing it in a co-taught approach? But I will say that that's part of the process, is kind of learning how those things fall. Within the instruction, again, we're trying to use those 6 models, matching them to what the student needs are. And when you walk into the room, you would hope to be able to not be able to tell which teacher is the gen ed teacher, which teacher is the special ed teacher, or students, or vice versa. Within the assessment, we like to try to work backwards, so we'll kind of predetermine what the assessment is going to be at the end of the unit or the module, and then think through, well, what are the supports that we need in order to get each student to the place where they can succeed on that assessment. Both teachers take on the responsibility of assessing all students. That's something that's been interesting as well, because initially I think, we kind of said, well, you're the special ed teacher, you can evaluate your special ed students and tell me how they did, and I'll do the gen ed students. And now they're trying to mix more, so that it's not just your special ed, you're evaluating those students, but we can really see what are the strengths and the weaknesses across the entire group of students. Again, just to inform the instruction, and it helps to calibrate. Because often as special ed teachers, speaking from that side, we don't really ever see what a student who is, excelling at a standard is capable of. So our viewpoint of where our students are becomes a little bit, skewed. And so it's nice to be able to have that full range. And then on the admin support side, and this is something that I feel like moving forward, we definitely need to think about because we know that the co-teaching model is effective once we get it into its full swing. But it's also one that is known to be a challenge to sustain because it's perhaps a more expensive model because it does require 2 licensed teachers in the room. I think that there are certainly some key points to keeping the model going that we need to consider moving forward. So one is that collaborative planning time. Right now, our middle school ELA teachers all have the same planning block, so they're able to not only collaborate across the grade level, but also the 7th and 8th grade teachers can communicate and work together, which has been really nice. The instructional time and kind of preserving that as much as possible is also pretty important. I know we've had many discussions about like, is a sub needed if one of us is sick one day? And we have different feelings on both sides because you might plan a lesson that really needs to have 2 adults in the room, and so you might want that sub. But I know some teachers have felt like, especially our special education teachers, we don't often tend to get subs for our special education teachers. So if they're out, the gen ed teacher is kind of left to run the class on their own. But if the gen ed teacher is out, we might get a sub and put that in. And some have felt like that kind of devalues their role as being the main teacher. So it's an issue that we're kind of still working through, again, as we move through co-teaching. But things like meetings and things like that can come up, and we just, would hope that as much as possible, we can have 2 teachers in the room, because that's really what the model asks for. And then I think the third thing is just using our ability to craft our IEPs around this model is going to be something that will be a shift for us as we continue to increase the co-teaching model, but one that will hopefully help to make our goals and our service delivery grids much more streamlined into an inclusive setting, so that we can really measure student goals based on the work that they're doing at the grade level curriculum, and we can write grids that support that co-teaching model for more and more students. So what questions do you have?
Committee members?
What kind of, or if you have any, have you gotten feedback from parents at all as
That's a
to?
really good question. I would have to ask teachers. I haven't heard yet necessarily, other than I know that some of our special education students' parents have said they're appreciative of the fact that the special education teacher is right in the classroom with them the whole time.
Yeah.
So that's the most feedback that I've heard so far, but I will have to go back to our teachers and see what they hear.
I mean, I'm just curious the way you laid it out. Obviously, if a parent comes in, you're not going to, no, in a way, you're not going to lay it out. And
Sure.
And so it might be difficult for a parent to, they may be happy that, you're in the classroom with them maybe the whole time period, but they may not appreciate, the dynamic that's
Sure.
going on.
Yep.
So they might be saying, oh yeah, we think it's a great idea without really realizing what a great idea it is.
Yeah, I know that teachers did present it on our open house night when parents came through to meet all the teachers in the building. Our co-teaching pairs made sure to be together at the periods of time that they could be to introduce themselves as both as the classroom teachers. And that was a really important part in kind of getting it all set up and started so that parents would know that they might see both names on a report card or a note home or something like that.
I'm really impressed with, you used the word marriage, kind of like, and been there, done it like 20 years ago, and it wasn't very successful because there wasn't this kind of support. But the adults, it's an adult issue that they really have to trust one another. They have to respect one another, truly respect one another, and they have to be really comfortable sharing with one another what their needs are, what their own needs are in terms of the teaching in the classroom. So I just think this is great. And I know the personalities, you couldn't ask for better people that are doing this. So you're hitting the ground running with this program, and I'm very impressed, Josie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a great experience so far, and I think that, like I said, the pairings were already kind of a natural fit. So it'll certainly be more interesting if we start to get pairings that need more support in that area. But again, I think once they start to see the benefits for both the students and for their teaching practices, it becomes a more agreeable situation.
Great, I am so impressed.
Any other committee members? Question that occurred to me. You're doing Algebra 2. It seems logic would kind of indicate that Algebra 1, which is the preceding course, might be a more fertile ground for getting them up and running and understanding and the blend and so forth, than jumping to Algebra 2. Well, I'm sure there's a great reason for it. It
Much
just,
of it was just scheduling, the reason that it wound up being Algebra 2. But yes, I think as our math curriculum is changing, we have, the new integrated math program, which we're kind of adding on a year at a time. And so we will see some shifts in what we're able to do, but I think because this particular pair was so ready to jump in together, and that happened to be the class that they were in together, they just ran with it. But what I will say is that having that be modeled, what we're starting to see is that when there's the opportunity for two teachers to be in the room together, they're starting to kind of try on different pieces of co-teaching. So an example of that is that Christine Kilmonis also works with one of our new English teachers in the high school. And she's with him for a full class period. So the other day they did a lesson that was very much infused with some of those special education supports. And she had kind of equal voice in the instruction of that lesson. So I think that in little bits and pieces, teachers are trying on the different elements. And so in any class, we're going to start to see how they shape their curriculum or shape their instruction a little differently. But yeah, I do understand your point to kind of starting it off where the learning starts.
okay.
I think if I can just say a couple things. Okay, good. I have a lot of opinions on this subject. But I think what's really important to remember is that both of the teachers are experts, whether they teach Algebra 2, Algebra 1, Spanish, wherever we're co-teaching, right? We have a content expert and we have a special education expert. So it almost doesn't matter what the content is. There's an opportunity. And the really challenging part about co-teaching is the adults, that if it's going to break down, it usually breaks down in communication around the adults, right? So they have to see each other as the experts. And that means sometimes that as the math teacher, I'm working not with the top kids, but I'm really working with the special education students because I know my math so deeply that I know where their point of breakdown is and how to push them forward. So Josie sort of alluded to this idea that it's a costly model, which I'm not going to deny that it can be. But over time, if we do it well, what we would expect to see is we would expect to see our service delivery grids decrease because all of our students' academic progress has increased. And so therefore, we could potentially do with less staff, whether that's para support staff or special education staff or different things like that. That's what we would hope over time. So what we want to think about is if we started this in 7th, 8th grade, how do we carry it up so that those students don't feel like next year they had this opportunity in their English class and now it's sort of taken away when they've really seen great benefits from that model, for lack of a better term. So I think we can do it anywhere. I do think we have to be thoughtful about our ability to build it, and in order to benefit as many students as possible, to build it up so we're not dropping kids off along the way, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, but that kind of goes back to my earlier question. Kids, it seems to me, are more likely to drop off Algebra 1 before they even get to Algebra 2, so that they wouldn't even make it to Algebra 2. Although you reminded me that we have this integrated math now, or I guess algebra, geometry,
Yeah.
so forth combined.
Yeah, I guess what I was alluding to, Dr. Allen, was not so much the transition of the curriculum or content, but more just sort of where to start with the students. So in particular, these teachers were in the 10th grade for their classes that were open and receptive to piloting the strategies. So then these 10th graders, we would want to make sure they got something as 11th graders and 12th graders, and hopefully they would be able to fade off that support over time. But I hear what you're saying, and I think what I'm saying is if they're getting an eighth, we want to build it to ninth, so on and so forth.
Yeah, rather than skipping eighth and starting.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep.
Okay.
Anything else on co-teaching?
John, how do you feel about?
Actually, I've been working on this for about 17 years. So there is definitely some benefits that I've seen over time, the programs that we've been able to establish. After 5 years, I've seen things like, 20-point increases in MCAS scores and ELA and math as well. So you can see it becomes more tangible. And the slide that Josie had with the dots and the desks and things like that, there's kind of a foundation of this as well. From special ed, we look at all students as being general ed students first. And so we just receive services through the special ed department. So when you look at those different models, they're all purple dots. They're not orange and purple or whatever. And when you look at those half circles, there's no indication of which one's the special ed teacher and which one's the general ed teacher. So even with one assist and one drift, or one assist and one observe, the person observing could be the general ed teacher. The special ed teacher could be actually pushing instruction at that point. And the advantage of some of those things are that basically that the teacher having a chance to observe the kids more directly with somebody else still running instruction in a system that they wouldn't have gotten a chance to do outside of co-teaching. So there are a lot of benefits to these models. And then the models themselves, I mean, I could say that co-teaching, team teaching should be what we're hoping that we actually see. But what we want is really for our teachers to say, well, it's going to be more eclectic. We're going to use the model that best fits the curriculum at a given time. And if it changes, like during the classroom itself, from one teach, one assist to alternative teaching or parallel teaching or something like that, that's really what we're hoping for. We want the teachers to be really masters of all the models and know when to apply them.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on to
Intervention.
Jillian Madden.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the intervention program. You've probably heard me talk a little bit about it before. We started it 3 years ago in the middle school, and primarily kept it just in the 6th grade. And this year we've actually expanded it to include 7th and 8th grade as well. Because of the range of students and the ages and things like that, it actually presents differently at every single level. And we kind of try to line it up with what the students actually need. So in our WIN groups is the first, layer of intervention. But our WIN groups are the what I need now groups. And this is happening just in 6th grade. We've carved out 2 half-hour blocks in our day. So every student is getting 30 minutes of targeted ELA and 30 minutes of targeted math instruction. So this is a time when outside of their general education English course, they're actually getting skills that are directly things that they need. So some of our ELA skills, some kids are still doing word work, they might be doing reading fluency, comprehension, and we even have our higher level students that are doing some of their independent work. They had to get approval where they could do research or something like that because they were students that we really wanted to push forward, and they had the ability, the work ethic, things like that to be able to do that as well. So we have some students that are doing that for English and some students that are doing that for math. And they, like I said, they get to choose if they want to do research, they get to choose if they want to build models. We have a whole bunch of different things going on that they're working on. For math, we're typically using that for foundational skills for some students, reteach, pre-teach, or to push an application for some students as well. So we really are able to take our time with each group of students to really push them in the direction that they need, whether we're backfilling skills or we're kind of projecting them further down their academic route. So that's happening only in 6th grade. Then in 6th and 7th grade, we actually are doing some fluency groups. This is something that we've done in 6th grade for quite some time, and we've expanded it to 7th grade. Our biggest challenge is we only have certain chunks of time that we can work with our students. But we did try to target a certain group that was our Tier 2 students. Our Tier 3 students would be our special education students that are already receiving different services. So we took our targeted tier group services students and we did some fluency practice. We've worked a lot with the teachers about creating different fluency structures in their classes. So we have students working on fluency in science and social studies as well as ELA. And we actually just got in our first cycle results. So if you want to click that, probably, I think it kind of will show. So you'll see, I kept it anonymous, but this was our first batch of students. The gray area was the first original benchmark where they came into 7th grade with their reading fluency. And as you move over, you'll see that the next 2 columns are the first progress monitoring check, and then the next one is the second progress monitoring check. And all of the green are where we've seen increases. And I'm so proud of these numbers for our teachers because it's incredibly difficult to increase reading fluency as students get older. It becomes more and more difficult at this age range. As we're looking here, you're gonna notice that for some students, their fluency has increased, their accuracy is increasing. We have some students where maybe their fluency didn't really increase, but their accuracy did, which oftentimes we'll see happens first. So this is just the small subgroup of those students that we've been working with. And this is, like I said, this is our interventionists working really hard with all of these students, but it's also the classroom teachers. A lot of what we're doing for some of our intervention strategies, which I'll come back to in just a moment, has a lot to do also with what Josie is working on with the teachers in the classroom. So even though it's intervention and co-teaching, there's definitely areas where they overlap because basically it's all about giving students what they need in the moment.
Jill,
Excuse me,
oh, sorry.
I can't read that. Would you take a couple of lines and just explain them?
Sure. And I'll take student 15.
Here, I can see the chart.
So student 15, you can see at the beginning of our benchmark. So we do an oral reading fluency benchmark at the beginning of the year. And it gives us a norm so that we can see where our students are. We know which students are kind of on level and which ones we need to support. And then when we analyze the data, it lets us see how we should support them. So if we take student 15, that particular student was reading 104 words per minute accurately with 96% accuracy. So what we've done is we've created various types of groups. We worked with the teachers on how to create groupings of students and the ways that we can benefit that the most. We've also done some fluency work during our flex block period. So we have a schedule of when our interventionists will take certain students and work with those students. So during our first progress monitoring passage, which is another grade level passage, this student went to 130 words per minute with 97% accuracy. So that was already a pretty decent jump. This could also partly have been, it was the first couple weeks of school. So some of that's getting back into the groove. And then you can see that our most recent progress monitoring passage, the student was able to read 138 words per minute with 98% accuracy. So they're starting to build and build. And what we'll do is now that we've finished our first, cycle of this, we'll be able to look at the data, see who's able to keep that steady pace so that we don't have to necessarily have them do as much of that work, and then we can kind of go to other groups of students. And then we'll also look at students that aren't progressing as quickly. We can look at why and we can adapt things. And that's kind of the beauty of intervention is we do it in cycles and chunks of 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and then we use the data to help drive that other instruction. So as we're looking here, we're seeing that in 6th and 7th grade, those fluency groups are giving us some of those gains that we're hoping. And then we're hoping in 8th grade, I've been speaking with some of the 8th grade teachers, part of their curriculum is they do long reads. And that tends to be one of the places where some of the students tend to break down because it's a longer read, it's a little more independent. So we already have our students that we are planning to work with for an intervention cycle once they get to that next long read, which should be in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. So we kind of have a plan for that. And then the last piece, we've included a back on track room. This is something that we found really beneficial in 6th grade. So we've added it to 7th and 8th. So you might notice that 6th grade has all 3 layers of support, 7th grade has 2, 8th grade kind of has 1, because we are trying to get them to be successfully able to matriculate to a 9th grade classroom. So in the back on track room, this happens during flex block, and it really is to support students that were either behind on work or absent when instruction was given. We found a big need for this began with COVID because students would be out and they would miss a week and a half of instruction. And now they come back and they feel like they're totally lost. So we put this in place because we have our interventionists and our tutors that are in that back on track room. And because they overlap oftentimes with the inclusion support, they're able to help those kids because they know exactly what was happening in the classroom. So it's not just somebody who's sitting there saying, okay, go ahead and do your assignment. They literally know what was the expectation. They were part of the co-teaching experience when the assignment was given. So that's kind of where that came from. And in 7th and 8th grade, we're also finding it to be students needing more executive functioning support. So in 6th grade, we are able to give them quite a bit of executive functioning support just by the nature of the way the curriculum runs. But in 7th and 8th grade, as you start to pull back some of those supports, some kids are ready for them and some kids are not. So this has been a way for us to help those students maybe that aren't prepared to go all that way with executive functioning on their own. And we really need to solidify those skills before they get into high school.
Could you define executive functioning?
So executive functioning is kind of like the organizational skills, the idea of how to do your time management. Or if I was absent this day, here's the things I need to do to make up the work. If you have a bigger project, trying to break it down into reasonable parts.
So it's self-management.
Basically, yeah. And it's one of the things that actually in students will develop a little bit later because it's part of that last piece of like the developmental part as kids grow. So what you'll find is some of the students have that down pat by 7th grade, but there's actually a large chunk of our students that do not have that until they're in high school. So what we're finding is if we're able to give them some of that support in 7th and 8th grade, they're able to kind of build those skills a little bit better so that when they get into those higher grades, they at least have those skills that they've been practicing. So one of the things that we are going to do, we just had Q1 grades close. And just like every other cycle is built on data, like everything that we are doing is built on data. So what we'll do is we took a look at our failure warnings for Q1 for the midterm. Those are some of the students that we targeted with some of the executive functioning, the back on track, that type of stuff. We're going to take a look and see what effect that had on their Q1 overall grades. And then what I'm going to do is taking a look at those is plan out some executive functioning support classes that I'm going to run during Flex. I'm hoping to just, I don't want these kids to feel like they're doing it every single day and it's like overkill. But what I'd love to have one where they learn a little bit better about how to manage their classwork, their assignments. We have 2 systems. We have Google Classroom and then we have Aspen. One is where all of the assignments are. The other is where the graded assignments are. So just giving them some lessons on how to organize themselves a little bit better. So we'll do a couple of those types of classes to help the students. And like I said, one of the biggest benefits to this is our intervention staff. Now we have them in grades 6, 7, and 8. So they're in all of the different grades. So we have students for 7th grade math. There's a 7th grade math expert there, right? There's an 8th grade person who's in a social studies class if you're behind on your civics project. So that's kind of how we're trying to balance it and bring it all together. So those are the 3 layers of support that we have with our middle school intervention that we've kind of been putting into play. So I think that paired with a lot of those co-teaching strategies are really going to make a big difference for our middle school students.
Yeah, and I will say to speak to that intervention tutor position, that's a licensed teacher who's in the classroom. So again, even if they're not in that classroom for the full 60 minutes, they have a little chunk of planning time and they have that knowledge and background to be able to really inform the instruction. So it's a much, more valuable kind of role to have in our classrooms, I think.
And our interventionists, the ones that we have right now, they're absolutely incredible. I mean, they're very, very qualified. They're so energetic. I'm actually amazed oftentimes because they literally are everywhere all the time. Like they're everywhere. Yeah. They have the instructions and then they run their own small groups. I mean, it's the way that they bring this together is very impressive.
Thank you. Committee member, Lee?
Yeah, so I going back to that chart you had placed up there, so I can figure out how you get the measure the words per minute, but how do you measure the rate of retention?
So there are different pieces too. So the DIBELS actually has 2 different pieces to it. There's an oral reading fluency and then there is a comprehension piece as well. So what we typically do is first we'll target the fluency And then sometimes we'll do different comprehension measures for students that are lower there. But we also do have that comprehension measure, which would have some different techniques that we use with those students. And we do have a similar progress monitoring ability with those ones. What we're doing right now is we're trying to get that fluency up first. And then we are doing different like inclusion type strategies for that comprehension. But there is a way to measure that as well.
But really, the fluency directly relates to the comprehension, because if students are not able to read fluently, then they're not able to kind of hold that information in their head and build that comprehension piece as easily. So if they're struggling through the words, then all of their mental energy is going towards that, as opposed to kind of reading the picture and understanding the text. So it directly relates to that comprehension piece. That's why we targeted first.
And in the sixth grade too, some of those smaller intervention groups, they are actually students that have comprehension specific things that they're working on. I did a model lesson today for one of our newer interventionists, and it was basically all around the comprehension and the phrasing, and then how to ask those questions that go directly back to understanding the text. So those students are getting that specific support during those small group times. Because it is something that's important. We try to explain to the students that reading fluency doesn't mean that you're reading as fast as you can. That's not fluent reading. And we really try to get them to understand that. So we do have different strategies that we use within those small groups. If we feel like students maybe aren't quite reading the way that they should, or they're trying to just impress me by reading 200 words in 1 minute, but they have no idea what they read. So there's little tricks and things like that we're able to do. But the comprehension is also measured through that database.
And so aside from, so I can appreciate the measurement and using the data, but do you also just kind of have a sort of a face-to-face, okay, tell me what you read, or let's discuss it. In other words, not putting stuff on paper, et cetera. Let's just have kind of a human discussion, and because I think the brain works a little differently when you're doing that type of thing. I mean, it might take a while, but I think the recognition of, oh, this is maybe important, or you might bring out something that's important that the student didn't, that won't show on paper or won't show on X's and et cetera. I mean, do you have the time to do that?
Yes, that's what's happening. That's what's happening in a lot of those small group interventions, is a lot of that discussion. We actually model a lot, because we do have also a speaking and listening standard that we have to teach and assess. And when we are doing that, it's always going to be directly related to something we've done in the curriculum, or SEL. Sometimes we'll do it through SEL as well. But during those small groups, we're actually teaching them how to talk about books, how to talk about topics and things like that. And then that is something that they also do a lot through the co-teaching with those strategies as well. We've had a lot of really good professional development this year and last year too, around just ways to get kids up and engaged, and discussion's a huge part of that as well. So what you're seeing there with that chart is really just like one little dip into one piece of what we're doing.
Sure.
And those are just the students that we're worried about with the fluency, but those are also very valid points that we need to incorporate into every piece of what we're doing as well. And I know that with the curriculum we adopted with HMH, they have a lot of those types of prompts and a lot of discussion types things too.
Other committee members? Well, I just have a couple of comments here. And I'm going to pick on my friend Trish again.
She looks really pleased. She's thrilled.
Well, she should, because she's done such a good job for so long. And we'll leave that so long aside, I
10
guess.
years.
10 years.
Well, 10 years ago, my number one grandson was in her school at the program that you had, no, 20 years ago. The program you had where you had the special ed kids and regular kids begin to interact in age 3, 4. Is that about what it was? Age 3, 4, 5? I believe. And then you were kind of leading the team when we went up to Ruggles Lane, and the reading instruction and what was going on there with the reading coach, with the regular classroom teacher and the administrator, so that everybody was learning more reading skills. And my understanding is that's now in math. And we see this in middle school, And lo and behold, we don't waste our time with Algebra 1 in the ninth grade. We go to Algebra 2 in the 10th grade.
We're fine with Algebra 1.
Yes. But,
Freshmen got it.
yeah, but the thing is, that's why I like our school district so much, and it's a great credit to you and you folks and your teachers, and I hope, Krista, this includes you. You pass our thing, because it's not the stupid put out a fire. Somebody doesn't like this little stupid thing or that. The MCAS scores, and Lee's right, these sorts of things are much more important. We're really working with helping the kids gain knowledge and get ready for when they go out in the world. And it's not just the stupid logistical stuff, it's education, and it's not working with the students as a glop, but individual students. What does he need? What does she need? What do they need? And this district just has a history of doing this sort of thing. And it really speaks very well of the administrators and the teachers and principals too. So thank you for presenting this. I think this is, well, it's really helpful to us to understand this kind of thing. Not that it's happened to me personally, but you can imagine somebody in the street. You got 2 teachers in a classroom, for Christ's sake. When my grandfather was up at the old whoop-de-doo high school, we had 1 teacher for 35 kids, and he did fine out chopping wood. What do you mean? Well, this helps us, I think, understand what's going on, why, how it helps the kids. And when you can give us some data, I think you're saying 20% increase.
You guys said something.
Yeah, you said that, okay, well,
Oh,
Yes.
yeah,
hope it also helps the MCAS scores.
We'll
but,
be looking for a 20% increase now on those scores.
whatever. I mean, when you get the data.
I'm just excited because we are reaching so many more kids that need it. Because there's so
Yes.
many kids that are not on IEPs that could use the extra support or a different strategy, like,
Yeah, this is.
yeah.
This is getting at what really needs to happen. Now, the MCAS, and I seem to be circling around back to that again, it's just an indicator. And it provides some information of who and what and where and so forth. And I guess I'm a little tender on that maybe because there's a new Dwight Allen professor at UMass. I knew Dwight very well. He's passed away now. But I've been asked to support in the spring a presentation on MCAS pros and cons.
Do you have any pros?
I actually recently listened to a podcast that gave me a very good pro, and I think that co-teaching speaks to this. The goal around MCAS is really to ensure that all students have access to their grade level standards and are being held to that standard. So I've always had kind of negative connotations related to MCAS. I was the first graduating class that had to pass MCAS in order to get a high school diploma. And I saw many people really struggle with that. But I think the benefit is, if it's really held to this as its ideal, that we're not taking a subgroup of kids and saying, well, you can't meet that standard, so this is what we're gonna offer to you.
Yeah, you poor dears, why we know that you're not going to make it, so you
Right.
just go do something else.
Right. So the idea is that as we're able to keep kids in their classrooms in this inclusive setting, then hopefully we can hold all kids to that standard, and the MCAS should be a measure of how we're doing it that. It's been used for other things, for sure, but
Oh, yeah, well, Jack Schneider's the guy that I told him, Bela Banathy was an educational researcher back in the 1970s. And he had a great statement on this. If you don't know where you're going, you can't tell when you get there. And I think that kind of defines the purpose. As you said, all kids, all groups of kids. I had a friend, Alma Allen. She was a professor at Prairie View A&M outside of Houston. She was in the Rod Page sort of School of Black Educators there. She was in the State Board of Education for a while, and she's been in the Texas legislature for 20 or 30 years. And she said, I get this data and I know that Hispanic males in the 10th grade are having the most difficulty in Houston. We need to do something about that. And I can remember we used to get, I think in the 1980s, there was surveys that were done here. And 9th and 10th grade girls were the ones that were felt most vulnerable, put upon, confused, upset, or whatever. Well, that says something about a group that, and it's not from academics, it was this social interaction kind of thing, and you can kind of see where that would happen. They'd just gone through puberty. They were so much ahead of the boys from a social interaction standpoint. It made some sense. So, any other committee member comments or questions? Lee?
I just want to point out, I'm not anti. Really, I mean.
Yeah, you said other things are more.
No, I understand, but I'm not really anti. It's just that I think that too many people put that on almost on a pedestal.
Yes.
And it's not, it has its role. I totally agree, but
yes.
I think it's, I think it could be managed better. I think the whole thing about, you were in the first class. I mean, in Lee Willandon's world, what we would do is we didn't use the stick to say, okay, if you don't pass the 10th grade or whatever, you're not going to graduate. I think the flip side is you start when either fourth graders take it or whatever, and the state says, okay, you get this grade, make your proficient at whatever it is, that child gets a $100 check. Right in the middle. No, really, $100, not to the parents, to the kid. And then in the 8th grade, maybe it's a $200 check. And by the time they graduate, maybe it's a $500 check. Instead of using a stick, use a carrot. I mean, people might say, oh, that's ridiculous, but people don't try these things. I mean, to me, you need some positive reinforcement. I'm a big Skinner rat guy, put those pellets in there so that hamster and rat can get those pellets and feel
What
good
in the
about
budget? Great idea.
That's the problem. We spend the state of Massachusetts spends a lot of money on other stupid stuff that we could throw a few million out there and send it to our kids.
Yes.
To go along with what Josie said and what Lee said, the MCAS, and I think it came to clarity the other night when we had the kids that were involved in FlexCon and their real life stuff, and we were talking about the MCAS results at the same time. And I went away thinking that the MCAS results, are we providing the kids with the opportunities to meet the standards? But that's an adult issue.
Yeah.
And the MCAS is an adult toy. Not a toy. Tool, excuse me, wrong word. It's not a toy. It's not a toy. But that it's a tool to make sure that we're meeting the kids' needs in terms of the standards. When it gets negative is when the kids end up with a stick. And it's not ever out there, but the teachers, they take it to heart because they feel that they're doing a good job, or, oh my God, I'm not doing a good job, or is it just a fourth grade teacher's fault, or is it, whatever. And making it an adult issue where it becomes a collaborative kind of thing, like we were talking about, where everybody shares responsibility for the successes of the kids. So but it's an adult tool, not a toy.
Right. Okay, well, did you have anything else for us tonight?
No, I just wanted to just sort of call out Jillian and Josie's roles, as you sort of mentioned budget, but Jillian is an intervention specialist. This is her first year as a full-time 1.0 intervention specialist. Prior to this year, she had been a 0.5 reading specialist and only a 0.5 intervention specialist. So up until this year, she really was focused on 6th grade and making that transition. And Josie's role is, as she stated at the beginning, an inclusion coach. One thing I want to say is that Josie's role and our tutors that they speak of are both funded through grant opportunities. So I want us to just keep this in mind because they're not part of our regular budget. We're guaranteed this grant one more year, but it's something that we hope to be able to provide you with real data that shows that we're making a difference, especially at middle school, so that we can really justify hanging on to these positions as the great benefit that our students, we believe, will get out of them. And I also just really want to commend them because they it would be easy to be in a role like this, to be narrowly focused and say, I'm just working on literacy, I'm working on special ed, I'm working on math. And they truly see the whole picture of the kids. That idea of executive functioning in that back on track room is something that my guess is.
I am going to send my 21-year-old
Yeah.
back to you for that.
My
Oh, God, I
optimistic,
failed.
yeah, my optimistic guess is that we're going to see much lower rates of not passing due to your efforts. So we really look forward to hearing more about that.
There is just such a need in the middle school.
Yeah.
There has been such a need in the middle school, so.
Well, middle school kid, my dad was a middle school teacher. And he said you either love them or you can't stand them. It's the way middle school kids are.
Somebody say to me, even in my 14-year-old.
Yes, I think I'm seeing agreement over there.
Yeah, they're a special population.
Right.
I will say that the teachers that are up there definitely have a place in their heart for middle school.
You
Like
couldn't
they were
survive
made to be middle
teaching in middle
school
school.
teachers, yeah.
Okay, good enough.
And the
Well,
sixth grade is all part of the team now, like,
For the,
no
yep.
more thinking like, should we have, shouldn't we have?
No, I
You
think
it's a
that
good
it goes
positive?
well up there. I do like that they still do have that extra layer of support. We have that extra intervention block, which I think is really helpful for the students. But they're definitely, I think they're in a good spot right now. I think it was a wise move.
Yeah, I think we've kind of been refining as we go the transition and how it's supported. I know that they've been thinking about like a link crew activity for sixth graders coming up, and you have some NHS students who.
Yeah, we actually had one of our IB students was just doing one of their projects and came up on one of the half days and did all sorts of the link crew. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, yeah, okay. So she tried to create something very similar to what they do with the ninth graders, with the sixth graders. And anytime the kids, we were just like, yeah, the kids are gonna run it all. We always are a little bit hesitant, but they pulled it off. It was an amazing day. The kids were running in the gym, they were doing activities. I mean, it was really amazing. I think they're gonna try to come once or twice again and make it almost like an every once in a while touch base type thing. But it went really, really well.
The girl who led it, it was part of her CAS project, and she'll be here at our November 16th meeting, so you'll get to hear all about it firsthand from her.
Great.
good. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. See you next
I have
month.
a question, and I'm glad we have the special ed director here. I've heard a new term for learning disabilities, and I was just wanted to run it by you. It just intrigued me. Neurologically diverse as opposed to learning disabled. Has that term come up at all? or-
Truthfully, I haven't heard it yet.
So I've heard the word neurodivergent a lot. That's something that's out in literature around special education and in general. I think it's a much more inclusive term because it can be applied to any of us. We all have our quirks and our different ways that we learn. I think it helps again to kind of destigmatize. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of life.
I heard I end up in the locker room with two English teachers from Eagle Hill at 6:30 in the morning because I'm there early.
I know you were.
And we were talking about this, and they were talking about the fact that there's IB up at Eagle Hill now, but one of the teachers was talking about the fact that he was neurologically diverse, and it caught my attention. And ADHD and all that challenge, and now he's teaching English. But he used that term, and I thought well, exactly what you said. It's very inclusive in terms of.
I've always been pretty upfront with my students. I think it's important that they know what they have an IEP for, what their goals are, how they can advocate for themselves. I think that it's really important that they understand all of that because they're going to be the ones who are responsible for it once they move on from high school. The CPAC had a great presentation about that last time they met in terms of students who are going to any college are going to need to go to the accessibility department and say, listen, I need this, this, and this accommodation. So it's important that we start prepping them for that early.
Teaching them how to advocate for themselves, because there is a lot of supports available as they move forward, so that's great.
Okay.
Let me know when we adjourn and I'll stop the recording.
Nope,
Okay, I think we're all set. See you next month. We can adjourn.
thank
You
you.
can stop.